Rem Koolhaus published a book, the title of which was S, M, L, and XL. And in that was the proposition that architecture detail was no longer a source of concern or interest for architects. And what I have to tell you is, as many of you know, I come from Philadelphia, which has a long tradition from Frank Furness to Luke Kahn to Paul Cray of working and focusing on the architectural detail, thinking that how materials come together is as important as how people come together in space. And so in 1994, when I read Rem Koolhaus's book, I took it as an interesting proposition that sat on the opposite side of what I had been taught and where I stood. It just so happens in 1994, I was at the time at the University of Nebraska in the middle of the United States. And a friend of mine told me that there was this young architect down in Lawrence, Kansas, that was putting together some incredibly well-designed buildings, exquisitely detailed, and that I probably want to make the half-day trek from Lincoln, Nebraska to Lawrence, Kansas in order to meet this architect, so that I might continue to build allegiances with people who look at the world similar to the way in which I do. And so a few years later, I did make that trek from Lincoln, Nebraska down to Lawrence, Kansas, and I met Dan Rockhill, our speaker tonight. Let me just explain the first time I met Dan. He may not remember this. But he had on kind of coveralls and work boots. And he was covered in cement and sawdust. And that was because he was out with a group of students completing the foundation of a project that they were going to erect according to their own design. And he then took me to a couple of other projects that he had done in recent years. And out of that first encounter, I developed a lifelong friendship with Dan, and I've become a great admirer of his work. And so I think the best way to get to know Dan Rockhill is not to listen to me tell you stories about him or to recite his defense, but instead to appreciate his work. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to Dan Rockhill.
So I will introduce you to two concerns that I work with, and one will be very brief, that's Rockhill and Associates, and then the second will be lengthy in comparison, which is Studio 804. Studio 804 is work that I do with students that David alluded to. Before I get started on it being all about myself, I want to congratulate you on the Watershed project, which I know was several years ago, and perhaps before some of you were even here, but it's really quite nice. And so all in the spirit of students taking up the hammer and faculty leading that process, I share with you then what I do. But as an introduction, I wanted to introduce you to the work that I do and have been doing as Rockhill and Associates. This work I started doing when I came to Kansas in 1980, and I continue to do that work as Rockhill and Associates. We do design and construction. There isn't anything that we really subcontract if we don't have to, and I'll share that with you here very quickly so that we can get on with Studio 804. So this is a wedding chapel that we built out on a field of grown grass where the bride would leave her ancestral home that you see on the left and walk out on the axis of the barnyard in line with that big maple tree that you see there, on a temporary platform of recycled basketball flooring under this great lamella arch, which you'll see in a moment, to the chapel itself where the event would take place on a fall evening. Following the wedding ceremony, chairs would be brought back up under this temporary lamella structure, and reception would go on into the night. So as the father of the bride, when my son-in-law-to-be asked, if he could have my daughter's hand in marriage, I said it'd be great. We got a little work to do first. So that's me and Ian out there building what my daughter came to refer to as her cathedral. So, but all of it then we eventually stripped down, restored the field, and I still have that lamella arch. So we'll find a use for it someday. We cut our teeth, we being Rockhill and Associates, on doing projects out in this vast landscape of Kansas. And most of them were houses initially. We do larger scale work as well. Basically, using the wonders of nature, the cycles of the weather and sun, to incorporate into our buildings mostly passive solar heating and cooling. So in this example, we take air in on the south side. In the previous slide, take air in low and ventilate it high up on the north side. We grow stone in Kansas, so we clad these buildings in stone. You see a sod roof on that, and this is the year 2000, if I remember right. Continuing with that language of passive solar design in this house, likewise in this house, and likewise in this house. We kind of cut our teeth on these projects. Also anchoring them as tightly as we can to buildings that I see in the landscape. In Kansas, probably not unlike other farm areas, during the Depression, most of the beef cattle industry folded up, so everybody was basically destitute without people buying beef, but most of the farmers who were savvy enough converted to milk so that they could, meaning cows, so that they could generate milk, and all of these little milk houses kind of flourished around through the Depression and up into the 40s before the economy came back up to at least sustain the farmers. And so this beautiful terracotta color comes around to influence buildings like you see here. So likewise, when clients come to us and say, oh, I suffered terribly from mold infestation in the house that we have right now, of course, I'm reminded of this language in the vernacular where farmers elevate hay storage on marginal property in order to keep mold to a minimum. And so our solution there for this client was to elevate a house in the form that you see here, again using passive solar, broad south exposure, concrete on the interior to create thermal mass, shading there that you can't quite see from the angle of the photograph, shaded in the summertime. So this is Kansas, land of vast horizons and muscular buildings and wheat and Bibles and beautiful ad hoc buildings that are made over time without the benefit of architects, but come out to be just beautiful assemblies of architecture. And trains, rednecks, tin men, of course, crop dusters, and us. There isn't much of anything that we designed back at that time that we don't also build, and there wasn't anything that we built that we hadn't also designed. So we were fully immersed in that process and continue to be, but I'll explain momentarily how some of that has changed. I live on a farm, and so we can take advantage of that with the outbuildings. Again, we use a big shop that we've made to produce everything from tile that you see here in the foreground, that would become a bathroom surround, welding, sheet metal work. There isn't much of anything that we can't make. And so we recycle materials here. This is a funnel from a former cheese making plant that went out of business, and its stainless steel equipment was scrapped, and so I bought this at the at the supply company or scrapyard and converted it to a laboratory, as you see here. We make our own doors and windows. Again, I don't need a steady diet of this, but I think we did it for maybe 2 or 3 projects. We've also restored most of the Kansas historic sites. This building is the site of the events that took place at this building. Coined the term bleeding Kansas. Some of you may remember that from American history prior to the Civil War. This is called Constitution Hall. We lift this building up and create a new foundation under it and set it back down. We've restored most of the Kansas historic sites, which I think are 8 of the 12 sites. Quarry Stone out in western Kansas to contribute to the rebuilding of Fort Hays. The problem with all of that design build work is that you're limited geographically. I like to be home at night, and you get kind of tired of being out all the time. And so when a developer calls and says, oh, you know, I've seen your work published, you know, would you be interested? But, you know, you can't really do this, can you? So I'm like, no. In fact, in this example, this is in Clovis, New Mexico. The developer called and said, you know, we've got this hotel, and I want to do a big development in downtown. You know, would you be interested? And I'm like, of course, you know, we'd love to do it. But, you know, I do this because it enables us to execute designs, not because I'm that crazy about doing the building, although we're good at it. The purpose of this is to enable us to take on these kinds of projects. And so most of the work now has been in New Mexico and likewise in Atlanta. But we keep going, and I still have a small firm locally where we're doing design build projects. So that's a little quick sketch about Rockhill and Associates. But the thrust of this, for David's request, has been to talk a little bit more about what I do with Studio 804. I started doing building with students 21 years ago. And I was teaching a studio that was Architecture 804. You might make the connection to the number Studio 804. And the 804 studio is the last studio that students take before they graduate. And it's about the worst studio you can have to teach. I mean, they don't know it all. They don't want to hear it. You know, you're literally blocking them from moving on with their lives. They want to work in their portfolio. It's just a miserable studio. I was happy to teach it, but I just never felt comfortable until we had an opportunity to go out and work on a little schoolhouse that was out in the country. Because we do all this building work, companies would approach me as Rockhill and Associates and say, oh, would you be interested in doing such and such? And if it worked, great. If not, I'd have to say, well, unfortunately, we couldn't. This was a preservation group that had contacted me. Would we be interested in doing a restoration on a little schoolhouse? I said, oh, we're really busy, I can't get to it. But maybe students and I could go out there. So I said something to the students. They said, yeah, we'd love to. And it was like a green light came on with students. It was amazing to me. They were so excited about being out there, you know, pulling their cars around at night, you know, the headlights so they could work and just drunk on the experience. So, of course, I remembered that and then gradually went on to develop what I'll share with you here, which is now in its 21st year. We do everything, not unlike what I shared with you with Rockhill and Associates, so we don't really subcontract much of anything at all, and in fact, I usually go into it if we have to, kicking and screaming to sub some things out. But basically, we do all our own concrete work, make forms, do all the welding, do all the framing, all the roofing, everything that's involved in producing a building, in addition to creating our own designs. Of course, that's the beauty of all this. Incidentally, I do this to make them better architects. I hardly ever want them to take up building as a lifelong endeavor. If they do, that's great. But I do this because I've sensed a change in the culture. This is one of our first houses. We didn't continue with this source. This was through the city of Lawrence. This would have been now, I think, 17 years ago that we did this house. And the first house we've done with the city, and incidentally, I went to the city of Lawrence and I said to them, hey, I've got some eager builders here. You have an affordable housing initiative. Why don't we get together? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And so we did one house, and the first one, they thought we tricked them, because it looked so different. So they were waiting the next time we came. And they said, well, what color will it be? And we said, yellow. They said, oh, good. And they thought it would be kind of creamy Victorian. Needless to say, it was kind of DeWalt yellow. And so we parted ways after that. And but we are completely independent. And I formed a not-for-profit corporation, so that means that we have to keep our own funding, meaning that I don't have a revenue stream from the university, other than, of course, my salary and the students are enrolled in a course, but basically we have to make it work and have had some success in becoming developers now based on that kind of business model. So we formed a not-for-profit corporation, left the city of Lawrence, and then went to a group called Tenants to Homeowners and started doing building with them. We did several buildings with them as well, again, working with concepts that I think were really important for young people to be aware of. In this example, accessibility would be one, or sustainability would be another. So we recycled this screen, which is clear all art redwood, and we recycled all the materials from a former basketball court for the flooring, etc. So this is still almost 16 years ago, and we're trying to recycle as many materials as possible into our projects. I do this as well because I got the difference in the course of my career between the students that I had when I first started teaching and kind of where we are today. It's a different, I think you come from different experiences, and so for instance, in most subdivisions today, you can't even build a tree fort. You got to buy this kind of goofy, snap together, whatever Fisher-Price ridiculous thing, and you're denied that opportunity, to kind of make things, and I'll give you just a handy example because of the season. Anymore, you go by grade schools, or my grandkids are in grade school, and they're about the only ones who make their costume. We're so involved with consumerism that we've lost that connectedness to people. And so I see that in some way as ultimately reflecting itself in architecture, and I think we have that consumerism kind of market to blame for it. We did a couple houses in Lawrence, and then eventually ran out of property. We did over the course of 5 years. Incidentally, when I was doing this, we would do it in one semester. Students would give up their winter break. They would come to me on the 3rd of January, and by the weekend of graduation, which is the 3rd weekend of May, we would have a completed house in time, we would hope. I mean, we didn't always nail it perfectly, but that was always our goal. And we didn't have funding, we didn't have a site, we really didn't even have a client. We did the first couple of houses, as I've explained, in Lawrence, then with the city, and then we went to Tenants to Homeowners, did a few with them, and then went to Kansas City, Kansas. And so what you see here is a map of Kansas City, Kansas, and each dot represents 5 vacant parcels. Now that's not vacant of structure, but exclusively, but more vacant of taxes. So this city has been decimated. Detroit is obviously the poster child for that, in the flight to suburbia. But Kansas City, Kansas is a very close second. So we could go to Kansas City, Kansas, and basically be given the property. We met, again, Studio 804, met with the neighborhood housing associations, and we said, brace yourselves, what we do might look a little bit different, but if you're interested, let us know. We'd like to work with you in some capacity. So somebody came out from the Rosedale Neighborhood Development Association and said, yeah, we like what you do. That's okay with us if they look a little different. And so we said, all right, well, great, let's go ahead and go for it. And so they gave us a site to do this project on, and this was our first, and it was a prefab. I didn't want students running back and forth on the interstate. We're based in Lawrence, Kansas, which is about 35 miles, 40 miles west of Kansas City, where this site was. Now, they didn't want students racing back and forth on the interstate at night. I thought it would be easier if we tried to find a way to make it in a warehouse, and then we could bring the project to the site. And so we found an abandoned warehouse to use. We're in the process, and you might be able to make out from the breaks in the floor here where we are. So you can see here is a break, and it goes up, and another one here, and that became the way in which we would take the building apart. Right? So we'd make the whole building, and we'd peel it apart and run it out the door, load it onto these flatbed trailers, and take it into Kansas City, and then boom it into position and create this house. This house won the Home of the Year award from Architecture magazine in 2004. And it was nice because that's a blind submission, meaning we're competing against multi-million-dollar projects, in Miami and all over the world, against other architects, and I don't think they ever imagined they'd have had a submittal from a group of students. So that was very nice. And the nice thing about that is that house sold right away. Part of this whole experience was for us to not only get the funding, but I also felt some responsibility to try to sell the houses. And so that house sold right away, and we were delighted and went back again. We are totally not-for-profit corporation. Again, as I've said, I'm not subsidized by the university, so we are literally hauling our 2x4s and plywood, on top of our Hondas to make this work and put these projects together. So that worked. That whole idea of prefab seemed to work, and we said, well, let's try a different neighborhood. And so this time we went to a different neighborhood, and the same thing. It worked. We sold it right away. This is leftover glass from Stephen Hall's addition to the Nelson Museum. Some of you may be familiar with the block addition at the Nelson, and this is leftover glass from that endeavor. We just ran it horizontally, but they donated to the project as well. And that house sold right away. So we said, well, that's great. Let's keep going. So the next year, we went even to a crappier part of the city. You can see this is our neighbor house, boarded up, and and we built this house. And this is our most widely published house ever, all over the world, just because of its uniqueness being up on the stilts as you see there. And again, modern interior, same process that I shared with you with the previous one. We make it in the warehouse, take it apart, ship it to the site, put it in place. And it sold right away. And Lester, here across the alley, he couldn't believe that anyone would be so crazy as to do a house like that in their neighborhood. In fact, the first day when we came on site, an elderly Hispanic man, kind of the godfather of the neighborhood, came up to me on the front lawn and said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm building a house here. He said, are you out of your mind? And he gestured to houses up and down the street that had sold for $80,000. Haven't been on the market for a year. And he said, what do you think you're going to get for this? I didn't have the heart to tell him. I thought it was already sold for $155,000, which it was. And so we seem to be into a pretty good thing. And Kenny and Leah, who bought the house, they don't care that they're the only non-English speaking people in a 20 square block area. They don't care about curb appeal or resaleability. They felt pretty cool. Most of these people, our clients, they read Dwell magazine. They want something that's hip. And God, they love to be in the urban core. They don't want to live out in suburbia. And so we had a steady stream of clients, more or less. We never did them directly. They were always done as a spec house, and whenever somebody could meet the price, we'd go ahead and sell it to them. Now we have builders who are doing knockoffs of our houses because they would do these crappy fake stone wallpaper with columns, kind of big two-car garage in front, and of course our clients would walk right by that nonsense to get to some of these modern houses. So the builders are doing knockoffs of our houses now as well. It doesn't always go the way you want. We ended up in one pretty waspy neighborhood. They didn't want us in there. They wanted to run us out. It was going to attract undesirables, and I quote, if we put one of our buildings in their neighborhood. So it doesn't always go the way you want. We ended up coming back that same year to do this brownfield site, which is a former dome, and we did this building here. And this house sold, but what I had to do on this house was I finally figured out that I had to fool the appraisers. The appraisers drive that market, and what the appraisers want are bedrooms. And so this cabinet is really in two pieces, and it slides apart. And there are a bunch of other cabinets exactly the same design. And so when I take the appraiser around, I've got 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and then all kinds of crazy stuff. But when the urban hipster who reads Dwell magazine comes around and they want open loft living, all the cabinets go over here and they got open loft living. And so we tricked the appraiser, got our $200,000 appraisal, and we're on our way. So that worked out really well. There was a tornado that hit Greensburg, Kansas in 2007, in May of 2007. And we always have an open house at graduation. And so the previous house, when we had that open house, the tornado had already hit in early May. Our graduation is late May. And so people were coming to our open house saying, hey, I really want to go down to Greensburg next. Greensburg would be a roughly 4.5-hour drive from us. And so I said, well, we'll see, I don't know. The tornado, this is the Google map before, and this is the Google map after. There were 11 people killed. I'm in a helicopter here. Dodge City is to your right, 35 miles away, and Pratt, Kansas is to your left. That's 30 miles away. There's nothing in between. Tornado came right down through the center of town, as you've seen. So we went down there eventually and made a presentation and explained what we do, and tried to make it easy on them, because what we do is very, very different. And the further you go in western Kansas, the more different it is perceived as. So these guys, despite they had already dedicated any rebuild effort by the city to become LEED Platinum in its status, and that is leadership in energy and environmental design. And we actually ended up being the first in the state of Kansas to do LEED Platinum, and we are actually doing our 9th LEED Platinum building today. So we've been on a steady run of LEED Platinum projects ever since, and this was our first one, and the first one in the state. They didn't know what to make of us. They were completely freaked out. They see our buildings and our projects, and they're like, well, it looks kind of arty, doesn't it? And we need an art center. Like, you need an art center. There's nothing left, I mean, I like art, but maybe a firehouse or something. No, need an art center, They were really just concerned that any connectedness to what we do in Studio 804 would ultimately lead to some kind of criticism. Plus, they thought it was pretty goofy anyway. Basically, what we do, all these flat roofs, and they just didn't quite get it. But they kind of put together an art center group, a little not-for-profit corporation themselves, and we built what's called the 547. 547 is the date of the tornado. Art Center in Greensburg, Kansas. And so we actually had to get 4 separate. One guy was in prison. We had to put together 4 pieces of property. One guy was in prison in Junction City, and we had to get him to sign the deed over to us. We wanted 4 contiguous pieces of property. And so that's the proposal for it, and that's the final project right there. All right. So anyway, so this is the final project that we did, and so this opens up to see how all this works. But before we did that, the poetry of taking what had been a building used in a magazine, suddenly I'm blank on the name. This is the largest manufacturing location in the world for ammunition. This is called the Sunflower Ammunition Plant. Of course, it's in the middle of the country. And the attractiveness to it being in the middle of the country is that, of course, you can imagine it, the last ones to fall. It's a 10,000-acre site. But the government has now put it back. They're working to put it back into the public use. And so it's no longer producing ammunition, but there were 5,000 buildings there. And you could bet they were all pretty well protected because they didn't want any of this stuff to get wet. We're not bullets. These are giant loads that are stuffed into howitzers on Navy ships. This is very big time ammunition production. So we went there, and the poetry of taking one of these buildings down and basically repurposing it into the art center was a little too hard to resist. So that's what we're doing here. So we take this building apart and take it into our warehouse. We're in an abandoned warehouse, an old nitrogen fertilizer plant. We make our building here, and we pull it out, and then load it up early in the morning. And when you go by truck like this, it takes about 8.5 hours to get there, just because you can't go any way you want. You have to be routed in a certain direction. And so then we get down there, we drop the trailers. It is still a disaster scene, so the Red Cross is still there. That's the hospital, it's like right out of MASH. And then we saw all the trees. It was a 200-mile-an-hour wind. It was an F5 tornado. And so all the trees, everything has to come out. We'll take these trees out. And then we load our project on with the units, as you saw us do with the prefab houses. And we push them into place. And you can see we're the only ones you see us in the foreground. They put a new water tower back. The other one was destroyed. And you can see there's nothing else out there in the landscape. That's the water tower. And part of it, just to add to the drama, is that nobody knows where anything is. So this guy thought he knew where the tornado shelters and the septic tanks and all the stuff that's buried underground was, and obviously didn't. So it's a minefield of problems. Even the ready-mix people, because we're doing all of this LEED Platinum work, I'm sure if you're familiar with the idea of fly ash and ready-mix, would say fly ash to these people, and they're like, whoa, what's that? You know, to their credit, they really rallied. So we do lightweight aggregate on an elevated slab here, and there's a full basin underneath this. This is a broad south exposure, and you'll see this wall opens up. So we make this wall here. This is an airplane hangar wall, basically, that we make out of steel. You can see it here in the open position. Here it is opening, like that. And that opens out to the community. We elevate the building on a plinth. You know, the elevation between Greensburg, Kansas, and Wichita, which is 3 hours away, changes about a ½ inch. You know, this is Kansas. And so it's the idea of setting that building on that same grade just didn't really cut it. So we elevated on a plinth, and you see it like that. And that worked out beautifully for an event like this, which was the Discovery Channel did a 12-part series on Greensburg, Kansas, for which we were included in a good part of those, but this is their kind of farewell to it. But it worked as a bench on the outside for the community, so it was very effective for that reason. We do photovoltaics and wind turbines. Again, this is a LEED project, so we have to generate our own energy. So we have 3, these are kestrels. The engineers in the group here, we could have done it with 1, but it just looked kind of lonely out there on the prairie. 2 looked like a couple, 3 looked great. So the aesthetic choice, 3 of these kestrels. And then, so here you can see we'll put those in, get everything set up. We figured out after we put the first one up that if we actually put the turbine on it before we put it up, it makes it a whole lot easier than shooting up the pole when you put it on your pole with the turbine. So anyway, then the skin outside is all this glass. It's very thick glass. That's the wood from the building that we salvaged that I described previously. We make all these details ourselves, so I think there's even a little garden hose in here somewhere. That's how we mount the glass to the outside of the building. Some happy graduates there. And the building is used as an art center and also as a community center for the city. Ongoing events, it really became the center for the rebuilding effort in Greensburg. So music, dance, and there aren't many people that are going to come to you here and brag about the fact that the National Association of Retired Rodeo Clowns had their picture taken in front of one of his buildings. So that's pretty proud of that. So that's Kansas. All right, so then we came back. We're done with that. We came back, and of course, things don't change for me. You knock yourself out doing this, and it doesn't take another, like a week, before there's a whole other group of 20-some students who are, what are we going to do now? I'm like, yeah, it's awesome, it's crazy. So anyway, we went back. We did the first LEED Platinum building in the metropolitan area of Kansas City. So we did this house, and then by now I have enough money that we're able to do these projects and sell them. So we've become developers, meaning that when I started, I had nothing, but I ran it like a business, and it took me a couple of years to figure that out, that the university wasn't going to bail us out or help us out in any way. So I began to run it like a business. So for a lot of the residential projects that I shared with you, I would say, when we worked with the Community Development Corporation, I would say, if you loan me $100,000, I want to use it for 6 months, I'll pay you back $108,000, 8% interest, and I'll sell the house at market rate, whatever the market will bear. And I'm just giving you numbers, but to give you an idea how that worked. And so they would say, yeah, that's not a bad deal. So I did that for quite a few years, and then I had enough money eventually to get ahead. And so even like when we did the Greensburg project, we had some grants through that. AIA granted some money. We had Google loaned some money on that as well. And then Greensburg did pay us back some of it. It cost about half. That where they paid for about half of what it cost us. So they eventually figured the Lord wasn't going to pay us back. They gradually found the money. So then we had enough to go ahead and become more or less our own developers, if you will. So bought a piece of property, put this house up on that, again, another LEED Platinum. Photovoltaics on the roof, wind turbine in the back, vertical axis turbine. And then we didn't sell that house. In fact, I had to sit on that house because the housing market collapsed. And so I was worried then about whether or not we'd have enough money to continue. And we did this house, which is now, this is not only LEED Platinum, this is also passive certified. So this would be a passive certified house, one of the first in the region as well. I think we were only about the 4th or 5th in the country, or in North America, that do passive certified. This would have been 2010, I think. And so, passive certified is a slightly different concept. Not slightly, it's actually pretty different. And so we work with the neighborhood. You know, this is by and large Hispanic. We have an opening day event, you know, digging in. This is our warehouse now. You saw us in the abandoned warehouse, but after all the stuff we've done, it published a lot. And I think, you know, the university felt like, geez, you know, because people come to visit us, you know, better get them out of the abandoned fertilizer plant and give them something a little bit nicer. So now we have a 67,000 square foot facility. This is only, this is probably less than a third of it. I mean, and behind my back there, a photograph is twice again what you see. There's a vast space. And so we prefabricate, make, you know, a lot of things there, obviously, because we have the facility to do it. So, you know, it was years ago, probably no more than 4 or 5 years before this project, as I've said, was in 2010, we never would have dreamt of putting insulation other than a slab in a basement, and now I'm standing on 10 inches of insulation there. The passive house concept is a super insulated building. It's a German idea, and they do not add any heating or air conditioning. They take the heat off the occupants and the dishwasher and the shower and everything else to heat the house. 90% reduction in energy. And so you have to build them very, very carefully. So anyway, we're starting there on our first passive house. So elevated slab for thermal gain, 12-inch thick walls, super insulated. And it's so technically superior that we don't even run electric in the outside walls because the Romex, a half-inch hole you'd have to drill to run Romex through, would compromise the integrity of the wall itself. You run all the electric in the floor. No windows, no openings on the north side whatsoever. Then I do a blower door test before we even insulate it, and we can follow. You can see here, you know, I can tell here, yeah, those are foamed construction joints. So all the construction joints are foamed. That's a super tight building. And then we run an energy recovery ventilator that is running constantly. That brings fresh air in and exhausts equal amount of exhaust air. So that here's the finished product. And then this house was for sale again as a spec house, and it eventually did sell as well as the previous house. But I was sitting on those houses and I had 2 houses then. We were out of money. And the dean of the school said, well, you know, what are you going to do? I said, I have no idea. He said, well, we have a little thing you might be interested in. We have a little house, you know, maybe put a little tiny addition on the back of it. And it's kind of morphed into what I'm going to show you here, which is the Center for Design Research. And so it was this little house. He wanted us to do something on the porch in the back. And it became this Center for Design Research. And so that's this building. Again, well, I think at this point now I have students for a year. They come to me in August, and I have them all the way through graduation. Usually, we try to spend, at that time, we were still spending a good part of the front end of the semester, the first semester on design, and then we do the building. I've changed that around a little bit now, but so this is all with a trom wall. I was really enamored of this idea of this really tight stone skin. You'll see this material. These are tailings, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But the idea that tight skin would come around and then it would step back and become a trom wall. You should understand at the very least that our sun moves through the southern hemisphere, and in the summer we want to block that sun, but in the winter months we want that sun to shine into the buildings. And we absorb that sun, and it gives that sun's energy in the form of heat, and it gives that heat off at night. It's a very simple technology. It's kind of chicken coop technology. And so the idea that then this stone wall would step back and become a trom wall sort of enamored me for the design, and so there you see that in place. Right, again, super insulated. This is the first passive certified commercial building in North America. Again, super insulated, TJIs for the walls. We made our own curtain wall here as well. You know, the curtain wall industry is basically 2x4 aluminum extrusions or 2x4 aluminum extrusion. It's pretty grim. And so really wanted something that was thin. And so we made this out of steel bar. And then we found you have to have a thermal break on that so that you're not pulling cold in from the outside. So we found an aluminum extrusion we could use to do that with. And so here we are setting this glazing, the curtain wall in place, and it will come through and set the glazing. This glass has a current that runs through it. This is called electrochromic glass. And the glass controls are tied to the GPS coordinates, and they are coordinated from a command center in Minneapolis. And so they know our GPS coordinates, so they can open and close the glass shading accordingly. So we know when sunrise and sunset is. They can also factor in where the trees are to block it. And so this is the glass you can see in the lower, it's in the middle as it begins to go opaque. But what it does then is basically it shades. It does what I described to you as needing shading in the summertime, because if you didn't have that and had all that south glass, the building would overheat. So we shade it using this technique for the summer. But in the wintertime, when we want all that sunlight to come in, it's open, it's clear. And that warms up that trauma wall, as I was describing earlier, to give that warmth off at night. Very simple technology. And then creating the entrance into the building is also the way in which we deal with the handicap. So this handicap ramp becomes the main entrance up in. So forming this and doing all this with students was quite the experience, but we got it in, and it worked out beautifully. And so here's the finished building. The outside of it, as I said, are tailings. So we quarry stone in Kansas, and there's one ledge that we use called the Cottonwood Ledge. And they take that stone out, it's a giant ledge, it's about a foot thick. You know, it's about as big as a forklift can pick up for them. They take them all, that's how they quarry them. And then they bring them to the production facility, and they kind of run it through a bread slicer, if you will, right? And so that gives you big giant slabs, and they lay those stones down, and they cut out the pattern for the building that they're working on, and those create the veneers, right? The veneers are 3.5, 4 inches in thickness. But the leftovers, right, you know from making cookies, right, that the leftovers you kind of roll up again and make some more cookies. In this business, you take that leftover to the dump as tailings. There's nothing you can do with it. So that's what we have plentiful quantities of. So they were happy to give us the tailings just for the freight, the cost of the freight. So we dressed about 100 tons of tailings in our facility again to create what ultimately would become these limestone bricks that we use in the building. So, and we use those for the trauma wall as well. And so we made a big thing out of the water reclamation. I think water is going to be the next oil. So this is the downspout, and we save that water in a cistern. And then that water we use to flush the toilets, and it also is used to water the living wall, which you'll see here momentarily. So here you come in, there's a lobby, and there's also a big screen that describes what the building is doing. So you can see in real time what the photovoltaics are generating electricity, and at the same time what the wind turbines are generating in terms of power. So there's the PV, there's a living wall, 10,000 plants, and there's the finished interior. First electric car charging station, and outside the building. So that worked pretty well. We had another college from nearby come over and said, well, we love what you guys do. We want to have one on our campus. So we said, well, yeah, we'll put one up for you. So this is this Johnson County Community College Center for Sustainability. And so this is on a site with a sculpture. We moved the sculpture. Interestingly, you know, they said, oh, we can't move that sculpture. I said, well, that sculpture's awesome. That's what we do. If we go back here for a second, there's a cable that's 10 foot high, and it makes a big X, and across it you can see the big 4 columns, and it creates an X. And in the middle of that X is they put a disc, and it tracks the sun. So this is actually on the summer solstice, and that line that you see here is right at noon on the summer solstice. And this is July, August, September, on up, and that's December. That's the winter solstice, and it comes back. And it's beautiful, and it's all fixed, right? And it literally tracks the sun, as I hope you understand. And so I said, yeah, it's great. That's kind of what we do, you know. So we took it down, and then we put it back. So we wrapped the building around it. Here you can see the plan. So this is all, you can see the south facing, the shading there is sandblasted glass. and we built all the LVLs and all the steel frame. We repurposed glass. This was glass that had a former use. We reused it in this instead. The contractor had gone bankrupt, whatever, it's not important. We knew we could get that glass, and we kind of designed the building with that in mind. And then the outside skin on this is used chalkboard. Chalkboard is probably something most of you don't even know what it is, but chalkboard would be what used to be in schools, right? What they would write on slate. And so we contacted demolition contractors all across, we brought truckloads of slate in from Cleveland, Des Moines, and Minneapolis, and basically made the building out of slate, which is building material, right? So we thought it'd be pretty interesting. So anyway, that worked out pretty well as well. And then after that, we did a project on KU's campus again. This is called EcoHawks facility, and we made this out of recycled aluminum. We have a crippled aircraft industry. Boeing moved out of Wichita, and so we could get aluminum at a pretty good price. So we wove this building, the skin on the outside of the building, as you see here. Those are photovoltaics in the foreground that form the cover over the entrance. And we eventually figured out how we were going to do this, and the three girls here developed the whole thing and wove that whole thing in the freezing cold up there in January, blowing snow, handling ice cold aluminum. And then there's the interior. This is just a little research facility for mechanical engineers, and it's only, I think, for 6 graduate students, but they wanted something that was distinctive like this, so that worked out very well. Again, repurposed glass in here, as I described before. And they take engines out, put batteries in, and run a synthetic gas rig to measure the charging systems, et cetera. Pretty complicated technology. We also developed this whole thing where we block, you can see, we love, as architects, we all love sound light, but here, you see it, but we're also able then, to drop aerogel panels. That's an R12 and an aerogel panel that we developed with basically the garage door technology so that we could insulate that and still get 30% light in this place. So that felt pretty good about that. So there's that building. And then finally, I'll come down the home stretch here. I think I got just a couple minutes. We just finished this, which is called the Forum, which is an addition to the School of Architecture, and it is on our main campus. So this is Jayhawk Boulevard, which is the main campus university. This is Marvin Hall, which is the home of the School of Architecture. It was built in 1907, I think, as the engineering building. And gradually, when engineering moved out, architecture moved in sometime in the very late 40s. And it's been the home of the School of Architecture ever since. The school, though, has never had a lecture space like you have here. All our students, for all of their courses, had to leave to go elsewhere to take their courses. So anything that would be like mechanical systems or building construction or history and structures, on and on, they would have to go elsewhere because we just didn't have space in that building to accommodate those lecture courses. We only had studios. And so we've always needed to have a lecture space. And the only available space was behind the building. The front of the building is an historic avenue. We could never do anything there. The sides also would conflict with it. So we could only come in the back. But the problem there is that for 107 years, the age of the building, all of the infrastructure came through the back of the building. So steam tunnels, gas, water lines, things people didn't know what was there, all came in through the back. And so that presented some foundation problems. But what we wanted to do was to create space. So this is the old building that you see here, and we've added this addition on the back. Now we've also opened up a space here. This used to be closed. This now is our commons area, like a lobby for the building. And then you go into this lecture hall or a jury or review space here. And so we created these two. And that's the finished product. It's elevated because, for one, because it's beautiful, elevated. But the excuse for that is it's on a many, many thousand-volt electric closet, which is below, and you'll see this momentarily. What's interesting about this building is it has 2 outer walls, and you'll see how this works in a moment. It has a dual wall, and those louvers that are inside are are controlled by a weather station that's on the roof, and they track. The weather station can track the sun, and that controls the movement of the louvers through the day. So it's pretty interesting technology. So here are the louvers, and they are in a space that's about 3.5 foot wide. So you have glass that you see in the photograph outside the outside, and then across 3.5 foot, which contain the louvers, then there's an inside glass. And so that creates the dual wall, which I'll talk about in a moment. But what basically the concept is, all of you have experienced this, when you go back to your car in the summertime or even in the wintertime, when all the windows are up, there's a little cooker in there. It gets hot in that space. And so you can use that in the wintertime by keeping that space closed. It's like a warm blanket around the outside. This is a south-facing exposure. And in the summertime, we have dampers that are located down here that open, and likewise way high up. And we get the stack effect to go up through the space and cool that cavity. And we bring air in from the underside, which is in shade, and that helps cool that wall a little bit in the summertime. So it seems pretty simple. On the inside, then, you can see on the left is the old building, right? We just left that raw in stone. And then this is the addition. You see then in the foreground, the seating, of course, 121 seats. And then in the back is a living wall. And then back behind that would be the jurors' space. And so here it is in section, you can see it all. Right, so we do our own construction, as you know, so we get started out there. Of course, the electric closet is pretty scary because not only do we have to build on top of it, we also have to isolate it for acoustic control because it makes a lot of noise. And also keep it from getting wet. So over the course of construction, consternation with having to deal with this, but we managed to get through it all. Just a minefield of problems with the foundation, multiple foundation redesigns, the grade beams and everything else to get this in. There were old foundations, all the things that I mentioned were in the way there. This is just an example of some of the stuff we had to pick our way through. Gradually, we found a location for 19 augured pits that we dug, filled with concrete, put grade beams in, and then started coming up. So here we are getting the grade beams in. We get that, we take Christmas, we come back in January, start the form work for the elevated beams that are supported by the columns below. We pump all that, and that's seemingly going well. We put up these big timber structure, these big timber frames, to kind of echo the history of the older building. Marvin Hall, the old building, is a timber frame structure. And so we wanted to echo that, but we also liked it. It looked like it was really nice, it worked well with the space. And so we make up those big timber beams and then boom those into position. This is me with, I think I had 18 or 19 students at the time. Students don't take any other courses. This is all they do with me. They get all of their graduation requirements out before they come to me, which is usually in 4 years, and then in their 5th year. But we have a lot of other options in many of the studios they go to. But they elect to take this kind of boot camp, so it works out pretty well. And so here we are framing. We get the frame done, start the roofing, get roofed in. Photovoltaics on the roof, no PVs on, no turbine on this, but ample PVs on the roof deck. And then the glass system, we worked with Old Castle Building Envelope on this. This is a pretty sophisticated glass system. We take delivery to our warehouse, but you see on this glass, there are no exposed mullions. We wanted the smooth face, so this is butt glaze, is the term we use to describe it, so that we would put the glass together and then we run silicone in between, so there's no snap-on closure piece on the outside. And so, the corner pieces of glass are about 350 pounds. The inner ones, the smaller ones, probably about 250 pounds. We'll see how we put these in there. But we set what's called a cassette system. So we silicone with structural silicone to the back of the IGUs, insulated glass units. We set in silicone, structural silicone, clips, and then we let that cure, and then we bring that to our site, and then we hoist these up in position. So we have what we call a frog that we put on our forklift, and I boom that into position, and the students take it, and then we snap it into position. And so first we did the inside, then we came around and did the outside. There's pretty anxious moments there. And then getting the upper glass in, you can see same routine. And then we couldn't get past the scaffolding to use the same technique, so ancient Egyptian technique here, block and tackle. Basically, get that upper glass in position because I couldn't clear it with the forklift to get the outer glass set. But eventually, we got everything in position. No broken glass, all worked out pretty well. But 1/16 of inch, of tolerance, and there was really no wiggle room in this to make this all work. A few anxious moments getting it in place. And then you can see here what I mean by the butt blades. So you tape all that off, and we run silicone in there to get closure, and then we make that concave by striking that off. But that's the finished elevation. And we do that because we like that smooth, tight surface. So that's an aesthetic decision. And then on the inside, we framed out the ceiling. There's a mechanical system up above the ceiling that will be hidden by this roof, which is, this ceiling, finished ceiling, which is acoustic. And so we ordered cedar for it. This is all Western red cedar. Cedar for it so that we could get the right, we experimented to get the right acoustic properties with it, to get the right chamfer on the edges and the acoustic board above it to make it work. And then here you can see in the foreground setting the elevated access flooring. And we did this so that all of these strips that you see, the risers, have openings in them, and they go into this access floor. So in section, incidentally, the goal with LEED is to minimize the amount of time before you turn on the heating and air conditioning. So what this means is that you want to introduce exterior air when the humidity and the temperature, say between set points of 55 and 75. So you can see on the right side, we have dampers that open, we pull air in through there, and it leaks out through the risers in the floor, and then we pull that out in the upper left with fans that everything quiet. But we move that as naturally as possible before we dump mechanically tempered air into the space. Again, that's a LEED goal that we try to make. And so here we are setting the Tate access flooring with these 4 fans that are underneath. Again, we've got to keep everything quiet, so there's some acoustic issues there. And then there we are starting to put the floor in, and there's the finished space. And this is the converted old jury room, now a new commons area. This is the living wall that I've explained already. We have water, we harvest water off the roof, pump it up to water naturally, of course, with rainwater or living wall. And then there's to the left, and you see the louvers give a beautiful color to the inside. And we use a daylight screen. The goal with all of these projects, again, LEED, is to bring as much daylight into the space as possible so you don't have to turn the lights on. So this screen and projector are made for outdoor projection. So, most people, not, even including myself, you go into a room, you right away want to dim the daylighting out. So, and in this case, you can project in daylight. All right, so we're done with that. How to do another house, and it's still going. So I'm just about finished here to show you. We did a house last year. Here you see another LEED platinum, and then we're doing a house now. I just left it yesterday. So I'm done. Thank you. I raced through that, so if you have any questions, I didn't get out of here. So, any questions about that? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
You talked a lot about the construction of your building. You're not so much about the design process. What exactly is it like the first 180 sided? What section do you all come together with, or do you talk about it like?
No, that's a very good question. The question is, how do we decide on the design? It's a little bit of a shell game. In no way will I ever want any single student to kind of be the architect, if you will. And a lot of times I will impose form on the building. And I do that because students aren't quite comfortable with this language. Being simple is not, your first gesture. Things tend to be pretty much out of control for a long time. And so because I know what we can do, I know what materials we may have available to us, what might be donated, etc., in some cases, not every case, I will go ahead and give the form. It depends on the group of students. I never know what I'm going to get, and so I wait and see. And if I feel like I'm getting in troubled waters, I'll say, listen, I could be your critic, and I'll get you to this point one way or another. here's what we can start with if you want. And I assure you, when you're done, it's your building. You know, I'm just going to be like this last house. You may not have seen it, but very simple gables, very simple form. It had to be that. We're in a historic neighborhood. We're not going to mess with the Historic Resources Commission. I know what they want. So I'll give you a very simple idea of just a very simple couple of buildings with some gables on them. Have at it, you know. So we kind of cut to the chase in that case, but that's a great question. Yeah, in the way in the back.
How do you measure affordability in terms of labor hours and materials? Is this a concern of yours?
I think the question was, how do we keep
Account for labor hours and cost of materials.
And how affordable are your buildings?
Incredible. So first of all, the labor hours, it's 6 days a week. They meet me at 7 o'clock in the morning. I leave probably at 5. They should leave at 8. And that's 6 days a week. It's a full hands-on experience. And the students are particularly good at monitoring that. You know, so why am I here when so-and-so isn't here, kind of thing. So that's never a problem. It's just hands-on work all the time, work hard. That's actually, though, a big problem for me because students, you know, they got the new Carhartts, you know, and new tool belts and new shoes and sending texts, you know. It's like, oh, we got a little work to do here. You know, they're just not accustomed to that. So it takes a little while to get used to it. But gradually, they settle in and realize that there's a lot involved here. The cost of materials, first of all, the single greatest, let me preface this correctly. In my business, when I get a phone call for a possible job, you know, I hang up the phone and my associate will say, what's the budget? You know, we talk about the project, you know, what's the budget? The single greatest determinant for what you can do architecturally is the budget. The single greatest thing that's never ever discussed in studio is the budget. You know, students are clueless. You know, they think you can do anything. Well, I like that. You know, I like that too. You know, it's all determined by budget. And so we run through our budget numbers almost daily to get everything in line. You know, if we don't know exactly, it's, you know, what's our allowance for that and so on. So I monitor the costs of those things very, very tightly. In the end, I sell them for as much as I can. But now the last house we did, I sold it for $292,000. Its value is probably $550,000. So yeah, and I mean, I knew in that particular neighborhood that I had to find somebody who would be able to pay cash because they would never live up to the appraisal. And I knew once I was above $150,000, I was going to be in trouble. I had to find somebody who was downsizing, wanted to live close to downtown, wanted to work downtown, who was probably in his or her 50s, wanted to have something where they could live in a neighborhood, and bingo, that's exactly what we found. So, good question. Sure.
I saw you were mentioning how you have done 8 or 9 LEED Platinum buildings in a row. Have you guys thought of upping the ante and attempting a net zero house?
Oh, these are net zero. Yeah, that's not a big thing. Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. What we don't do is living building challenge. We can't do living building challenge because the long term on that has to be monitored very, very closely, and it comes with an expense. You realize that I do one of these a year, and so as soon as I leave, I don't know what happens. I can't go back and monitor these things. Fortunately now the technology is out there, and like Crestron is going to work with us to develop a monitoring system so we can see how the buildings perform. But otherwise, I guess they do okay. You know, it's not a very sophisticated answer, but that's kind of the way it is. But it's a good question.
Yeah, so all of these projects, such an amazing use of materials. What kind of research do you do to find these, you know, amazingly reclaimed?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, I kind of know what's out there. I have a feeling for some things that I'd sort of be interested in pursuing. But the students bring a lot to it. It's really directed toward me, and really it should be directed toward them. You know, they are pretty good at finding things. You also realize that for every one we pick, you know, there's 100 that we looked at that didn't get picked. But we're always looking at a lot of stuff, talking through a lot of different things. And so, you know, sometimes it bears fruit and sometimes it doesn't. You know, so,
About here in the middle?
Yeah, yeah.
You have buildings that you build in the landscape and then prefab buildings. Can you talk a little bit about the difference of the
the buildings that we do as prefab, we still try to take advantage of the solar orientation, which is very important for me for the kind of sustainable aspect of it. I still, even though we do the prefab, doesn't mean you just kind of drop the house off and run, right? There's still a lot of site work that has to be done. I find students are a little queasy about some of these things. For instance, in the last prefab that we did before we went to Greensburg, I showed you a photograph of it. It's just kind of two white forms and a long ramp up to it. Well, in front of you is the driveway. And that's called stability grid. It's basically a grid of plastic that you put down. You don't really have to use concrete. That's the advantage. And it percolates. It lets the water go into. Oh, the students are so nervous. Well, how will you know where the driveway is? And it's like, it seemed to me, it was like, stupid. It looks so great. You know, what is wrong with that? You know, and it's pervious, if you will. And so you know, they're all pretty naive. Again, I'm careful, you know, how I say this, but you know, they just haven't had experience. And so to me, it was like, yeah, of course, that's awesome. You know, we can do that. So, but I do pride myself on never making a phone call. Guys, I want to point out, this is student work. If they're clearly on the larger scale projects, you know, when you're doing a university building, incidentally, that's a state job, which is enough to, you know, bring fear into anybody that, you know, knows about working for the state of Kansas or any other state job for that matter. So on that, I had to be much more hands-on, but I pride myself in having the students do it all. And it's rare that I'll make a phone call. So it's very much a hands-on, very much your responsibility. And that's kind of a hard thing for students to kind of get used to, but a couple of morning sessions with me and they figure it out in a hurry. So, but it's a good experience. And I think students are anxious, you know, we live in an incredibly pampered society. And, you know, I think everybody is anxious to have this kind of experience. You have to get your hands into it, you know. An amazingly disconnected world that we're in from the kind of tactile qualities of architecture. So, you don't need to do all that. Somebody else have a question?
You just began speaking to it, but my question is, from an educational or institutional standpoint, do you think that this kind of work, this apprenticeship, if you will, is important for students to have? Necessary?
Well, for two reasons. One is, of course, they get their hands in it and they're so much more confident. It's amazing to see. Yesterday we poured concrete and I was in the way. But when we started 5 weeks ago, it was literally like we were the Keystone Cops. They were like so stupid, I couldn't believe them, you know. But they're smart, again, same here, you know. You just kind of need to kind of find your own way through it. And so that kind of confidence that it gives you, not that they're going to pour concrete, but just an understanding of materials. You know, when we do the cut and fill for moving earth, you know, kid comes in, he's got it to the third decimal place, you know. And I'm like, really? You know, when you see how we do this kind of work, you know, it's going to be pretty amazing. Oh, when we make the sewer tap, I was like, my God, you know, that's how that works. You know, it was just as amazing to everybody. And then what happens, because we get published a lot, students are ready to go anywhere. And so if I get a call from some prospective employer in Seattle who's going through 60 resumes, Studio 804, yeah, I know who they are, you know, and then I get the call, and how's Molly? And I say, yeah, she's awesome, you know. Oh yeah, so Molly gets the job. So there's that advantage as well, is having that kind of connectedness, and people appreciate the fact that we're kind of in there, kind of doing this kind of, and again, you know from the watershed project, right? I'm assuming.
Did you grow up building things? When did you start making things?
I'm sorry.
When did you start making things? Did you grow up building things?
My father was a farmer, and so I was around this kind of stuff. And then I was a gearhead in high school. I raced cars. I held the land speed record at Islip Speedway. So I was a gearhead, and then I went to college, and I was surprised. I went to Notre Dame, and I was surprised. I thought it was more building. You know, what's this design stuff, you know? But I figured it out, you know, and I was pretty good at doing that, and then I melded the building. But I started teaching to avoid the draft at a really young age. In 1970, I started teaching. And as a school teacher, you don't make much money. And I had a family on the way. You know, I married my high school sweetheart, still married to her, and a young family. And so I had to do something in the summer, and I could build. So I started doing building right away. And you know, no matter what they asked, oh, sure, I could do that. You know, I was clueless as to what I was doing. But I could pretty well figure it out. And I had to go to the library. You have YouTube. That's what I tell my students, you know, you have YouTube, it couldn't be easier, you know, sorry. More questions?
Dan, I want to
Sure,
thank you
sure,
so
sure.
much. I know. For me, it's a real treat to have you here because you're an inspiration to me because you're such a wonderful faculty member and a great teacher. I think you're an inspiration to students because you show that students can accomplish great things and tackle some of the greatest challenges in the world. And third, you're an inspiration because you are a terrific designer.
Thank you.
And we're really glad that you would join us this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Before we walk out, I just want to remind you all that next Wednesday is another lecture, and this one is by, help me out, please.
Renato Anelli, the director of the Lombardo Institute. He's coming from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he's a professor of architecture and design there.
So see you all next Wednesday, if not before. Thank you.
This is executive.